It was clear long before that night that something was off in the Henderson household. Sarah Henderson, 29, lived in Maybank, Texas with her husband Jake and their two daughters, Kay, 7, and Kenley, 5. Neighbors had occasionally noticed strange behavior, moments when Sarah seemed anxious or paranoid, talking about people following her. Police had been called to the house twice before, once in 2015 when someone reported yelling, which turned out to be a phone argument, and again when a suspicious car was spotted nearby. Neither incident led to any charges or serious follow-up. Years earlier, in 2010, Child Protective Services had investigated the family, but the findings were never made public. Still, the pattern was there. Sarah sometimes seemed unstable, her fear of outside threats increasingly visible to those around her. On the night of November 1st, 2017, the tension in the Henderson household came to a head. Around 11:30 p.m., Jake Henderson called 911, reporting that his wife, Sarah, was acting unusually and might harm herself.
CMS, this is Patricia.
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering if I could get somebody to come out here and check my wife out.
Hey, what city?
Maybank, Texas.
Okay, tell me exactly what's going on.
My wife, she's like, something's going on with her.
Okay. Can you describe what's going on, the symptoms?
Like she's freaking out, like somebody's out to get her.
Okay, give us just one moment.
She won't listen to me. You won't talk to me.
Sir, give me just 1 second. We're going to get help on the way. I'm putting in some information for him, okay?
Okay, thank you.
I'm good. I'm good.
No, you're not.
Yes, I'm okay.
You're not good.
Unsure of how serious the situation was, he wanted someone to check on her. Deputies were dispatched to the home and arrived shortly after the call. They spoke with Jake and Sarah, asked a few questions, and did a quick walkthrough of the house. Everything appeared normal. Both Jake and Sarah insisted there was no danger, so the officers left. At that point, the warning had been recorded, but nothing had triggered immediate action. After the first visit, Sarah seemed to settle down. Jake even called back to cancel the ambulance, saying she was fine. Despite this, deputies returned around 11:45 p.m. as a precautionary follow-up. They spoke to Jake and Sarah again, looked around the house, and found nothing to indicate danger. No signs of violence or struggle were visible, and both appeared calm. With no reason to intervene, the officers left, leaving the household in a temporary quiet. The sense of threat that had prompted the initial call was dismissed, and the night returned to an uneasy stillness. After the deputies left the second time, Jake went to bed, thinking the situation had been resolved. For several hours, nothing unusual happened, and the household appeared normal. A few hours later, that calm was shattered. Sarah woke Jake in the middle of the night, her words forcing him into immediate action. What she told him left no room for uncertainty. Something terrible had happened. Jake grabbed the phone and called 911 again, panic in his voice. This was the moment when the situation escalated from concern to disaster.
Henderson County 911.
Yes. My wife just shot her kid. She's trying to commit suicide now. She's trying to choke herself. Why do you keep grabbing your neck?
I can't.
You can't what?
All right, and how old are the children?
7 and 5.
And they're in the bedroom?
Huh?
Are they in the bedroom, sir?
No, they're in the living room.
They're in the living room and they're not breathing?
No,
Were you home when she did this, or did you just get home?
I was asleep.
Okay, sir, we do have help on the way, okay? We have an ambulance headed that way as well as officers, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything else you need to...
No.
Okay.
Why did I do that, babe? I don't know.
She's not trying to leave or anything, correct?
What's going on here, Jay? Nothing's going on. That's why I tried telling you. She keeps saying somebody's after her. There's nobody after her. There's nothing. She keeps saying people are coming. There's nobody even here. What did I do, Lord? What did I do? What did I do, God? What did I do, God? Baby. Baby, get off the phone. Why? Get off the phone. No, stop. Get off the phone. For what? Get off the phone. Why?
Were the children asleep in the living room, or did they get up? Do you know?
They were asleep.
They were asleep in the living room, and then she went in there?
Yes. I was asleep.
And were you asleep in the bedroom?
Yes.
Okay. Was Sarah asleep in the bedroom with you when she got up?
I guess. She was asleep when I went to sleep last night, and I woke up, she come in there, and she goes, Dave, I just shot the kids. And I didn't want to believe it. I went in there, and they were dead. Stop choking yourself. Quit. I'm not, Dave. I'm not, Dave. Please.
Okay.
Please. Please what?
Please shoot me, please.
I'm not shooting you. No. No. I can't.
Can you hear me? Where did she shoot the kids?
In the head.
In the head on both of them?
Yeah.
Dave,
What?
why didn't you tell me to calm down?
I told you that last night. You said you were fine. Why didn't you say something?
What? What, babe?
What? What? No. Quit.
What is she doing?
She keeps trying to get the gun from me.
No, I don't, Dave.
Well, what are you doing then? What are you doing? Did you sit over and pick up this gun too?
You don't understand, Dave. You don't understand, Dave. You don't understand.
Don't understand what? What are you talking about? I don't understand at all.
Dave,
What? What?
I'm sorry.
Why though? Why? 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 Here they come. They're here.
Shoot me.
They're here.
Okay, well, I'll let you go now, okay, so you can open the door.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.
When the officers arrived at the Henderson home, Sarah was still inside. She was immediately taken into custody without resistance. During interviews with investigators, Sarah admitted that she had been planning the shootings for at least 2 weeks. She revealed that she'd even tried to shoot Jake while he slept, but the gun jammed, which is what had awakened him that night. She explained that she had been feeling overwhelmed, paranoid, and convinced that people were out to get her. Jake and a friend confirmed that Sarah's behavior in the days leading up to the incident had been increasingly erratic. The confession provided a clearer picture of how long the danger had been developing and how close the family had come to an even larger disaster. Sarah underwent psychological evaluations, and the results were contradictory. One expert determined that she was sane, while another concluded she was not. Despite the differing opinions, the court ultimately ruled that she was competent to stand trial. The legal system recognized her responsibility for the actions, even as questions about her mental state lingered. In a courtroom filled with family members and law enforcement, Sarah Nicole Henderson pleaded guilty to 2 counts of capital murder. By accepting a guilty plea, she avoided a trial and the possibility of the death penalty. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal chapter of the case was closed, and the sentence ensured that she would never be released, but it could not undo the damage that had already been done to the family. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Brandon was living in San Angelo with his girlfriend, Ledessa Lofton. They had been together since high school, on and off, but at this point they were essentially common-law spouses. They shared 3 children, with a newborn in the house, and Brandon also had an older daughter from a previous relationship. On the surface, it looked like he was trying to hold everything together. He was working long hours in the oil fields, sometimes 60 hours a week, sometimes closer to 90. Chasing overtime and skipping weekends so there would be enough money coming in. But behind that effort was a lot of pressure. Brandon had recently been released from jail after getting caught selling weed to an undercover officer. Not long after, he found out there was still an active warrant out for his arrest in Johnson County, this time for possession with intent to distribute. He believed the charge was bogus and planned to fight it, but hiring a lawyer took time and money, and both were already stretched thin. That stress hit alongside something else Brandon was struggling with. He had a history of substance use and had been clean for almost 6 months, but under the weight of everything happening in his life, he relapsed. 2 days before he vanished, he He called his brother Kyle, asking if he could help him get drugs. Kyle tried to talk him out of it, reminding him how long he had stayed clean, but Brandon was already set on it. Realizing his brother would get drugs either way, Kyle directed him to a coworker named Chris, wanting at least to know what Brandon was taking and where it came from. Brandon and Chris met up and went on a meth binge. Around that same time, Brandon disappeared for nearly a full day, only to be tracked down later at a friend's house near Fort Worth, more than 3 hours away from where he lived. That episode mattered because it showed how erratic his behavior had already become and how quickly he could spiral. When Brandon finally returned home, he wasn't stable, and whatever grip he had on reality was already starting to slip. On the evening of August 8th, 2013, Brandon came home to San Angelo. When he walked through the front door, Ledessa was already furious. She knew he had been using substances again, and with a newborn in the house, the situation felt unbearable. This wasn't new territory for her. She had watched him fall into this cycle before, and every time it brought the same fear and uncertainty. The argument escalated quickly. The stress that had been building for weeks finally boiled over, and harsh words were exchanged. Later, Ledessa would say there were things she said that night she could never take back. But in that moment, the fight reached a breaking point. Brandon decided he couldn't stay. At around 11:30 p.m., he called his father, who lived near Crowley, a suburb outside Dallas, and told him he was coming to visit. Less than half an hour later, at 11:53 p.m., Brandon got into his silver Ford F-150 and left the house. He headed north, alone, driving out of San Angelo and into the darkness of rural Texas. From that point on, nothing about the night would unfold normally. What started as a drive away from an argument would turn into something far more alarming, and the decisions Brandon made in those next few hours would place him on a path he would never come back from. Not long after Brandon left San Angelo, he called his brother Kyle while driving north. He didn't mention the fight with Ledessa or why he had suddenly decided to leave town. Instead, he sounded agitated and unfocused. Brandon told Kyle that a group of men from the neighborhood were chasing him and trying to run him out of town. His speech was rushed and uneven, and it was hard to tell how much of what he was saying made sense. Kyle pressed him, asking directly if he was hallucinating from substances. Brandon denied being under the influence, but the story he was telling kept shifting. At one point, he said a state trooper had pulled one of the men over. Then, almost immediately, he claimed there were still 2 of them following him. The details didn't line up, and Kyle couldn't tell whether Brandon was confused, scared, or both. There was no clear explanation of who these men were or why they would be after him. Brandon didn't slow down to think it through. He spoke in fragments, jumped from one idea to another, and then, without warning, he hung up the phone. The call ended abruptly, leaving Kyle unsettled and unsure of what was actually happening to his brother out there on the road. As Brandon continued north, his situation deteriorated quickly. Somewhere along Highway 277, between San Angelo and Bronte, his truck began to run out of gas. He called Kyle again, this time saying he was stranded and needed help. His location was vague, but he said he was about 30 minutes ahead of where Kyle lived. Kyle immediately got up and went to Brandon and Ledessa's house to grab a gas can that had been left on the porch. Then, in the middle of the night, he headed out with his wife and their 4-year-old son to try to find Brandon along the highway. While Kyle was driving, Brandon kept calling. None of the conversations lasted long. Brandon would say a few words, then hang up. His voice sounded strained and distracted, like he couldn't focus long enough to finish a sentence. Kyle could tell something was seriously wrong, but he still expected to find his brother sitting by the truck, waiting for gas. During one of these short calls, Brandon said something that should have been alarming. He told Kyle that he was bleeding. At the time, Kyle didn't think his brother was in immediate danger. He assumed the substances were causing confusion, and that whatever was happening would make sense once he reached the truck. But with every broken phone call, it became clearer that Brandon was unraveling, alone in the dark, and getting harder to reach. By the time Kyle was closing in on Brandon's location, the night had shifted from a simple rescue to something unpredictable. Brandon was no longer just stranded. He sounded scared, disoriented, and increasingly disconnected from reality. At 12:50 a.m., with his brother still on the road trying to reach him, Brandon made a decision that would define everything that followed. He called 911. In Coke County, emergency calls didn't go to a standard dispatch center. They were routed to a local nursing home in Robert Lee, where staff answered emergency lines before contacting law enforcement. When Brandon got through, his voice was panicked and rushed.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. The safe was just pushed some guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. You guys take the bitch to the woods. Quick flirting. And when I talking to him, I show you in his home. I just got the first guy.
You need an ambulance?
Yeah. No, I need the cops.
Brandon told the dispatcher that he was in the middle of a field and that his truck was out of gas. He said there were people around him, that someone was chasing him into the woods. As the dispatcher tried to ask basic questions, Brandon spoke in fragments, cutting himself off, then starting again. At one point, he seemed to describe another vehicle and some kind of confrontation happening nearby, as if he was watching it unfold in real time. When the dispatcher asked if he needed an ambulance, Brandon initially said yes, then corrected himself and asked for the police instead. That detail stood out. Brandon had an active warrant for his arrest and had spent time avoiding law enforcement. Yet, whatever he believed was happening around him was frightening enough that he wanted officers there anyway. The most alarming part of the call came in the middle, when Brandon said something that has been debated ever since. Through the static and overlapping voices, it sounded like he said that a stapler, or stapper, had just pushed some guys over.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. The safe was just pushed some guys over. Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. The safe was just pushed some guys over.
Others believe he was trying to say state trooper while panicking. The words were unclear, but the fear in his voice was not. He was describing multiple people, movement, and chaos in the darkness around him. The call ended abruptly, cutting off mid-sentence. In the background, there were sounds that some believe could be gunshots.
No, I need the cops.
When the line went dead, Brandon was still alone, somewhere off the highway, and no one knew exactly what he was seeing or who, if anyone, was actually there with him. While Brandon's 911 call was ending, Kyle was still driving through the dark toward Highway 277. He didn't know his brother had just asked police for help. At around 1:10 a.m., Kyle reached Brandon's truck at the side of the road. Almost at the same time, a Coke County Sheriff's deputy pulled up after a trucker reported a vehicle partially blocking traffic. Brandon's silver Ford F-150 was sitting with its hazard lights on, the front end angled slightly into the roadway. It didn't look like a truck that had calmly coasted to a stop after running out of gas. It looked like someone had tried to pull back onto the road and failed. As Kyle spoke with the deputy and explained what little he knew, his phone rang. It was Brandon. According to Kyle, his brother told him, "I can see you. I'm right here." Kyle looked around the highway and the surrounding darkness, but Brandon was nowhere in sight. The deputy, who had just driven the same stretch of road, hadn't seen anyone walking along it either. Kyle knew about the warrant for Brandon's arrest and assumed his brother was hiding from police. Because of that, he didn't tell the deputy that Brandon was on the phone with him in that moment. While still on the call, Brandon suddenly noticed the deputy's headlights and shouted a code phrase the brothers used, meaning the cops were approaching. When Kyle told him he wasn't going to run because he hadn't done anything wrong, Brandon snapped at him and hung up. That was the last time Kyle ever spoke to his brother. Brandon had just been on the phone, close enough to see the road and the vehicles, and then he was gone. After the deputy checked the truck and left to patrol the area, Kyle drove a short distance north toward Bronte, hoping to find Brandon. He waited for 30 to 45 minutes, expecting his brother to emerge from wherever he was hiding. But Brandon never appeared. Calls went straight to voicemail after 1:19 a.m., and no sign of him showed up along the road. The truck remained in the same spot, parked oddly with hazard lights on, front end partially in the lane. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, no evidence that anyone else had been nearby. It was as if Brandon had simply vanished into the darkness. This absence, immediately following his desperate and fragmented 911 call, left a chilling impression. Everything he had said, the fear and panic in his voice, the people he claimed were chasing him, none of it could be verified. The only thing left behind was the truck, the night, and the unanswered questions about what Brandon had actually encountered on that stretch of highway. Nearly 9 years later, Brandon's disappearance finally reached a grim resolution. On February 4th, 2022, a volunteer search party led by a former classmate conducted a foot search in an area near Highway 277 that had never been properly examined. Thick brush and dense vegetation had previously made aerial searches ineffective. During this search, they found Brandon's shoes and shorts, the same clothes he had been wearing the night he vanished. Law enforcement and a professional search team moved in, and not far from the clothing, human remains were discovered. After years of testing, on December 25th, 2024, lab results confirmed that the remains belonged to Brandon. The location of the remains, less than a mile from his truck, suggested that he never got far from the place where he made his last desperate calls. After nearly a decade, there were few clues about how he died. The cause of death remained unknown. The only certainty was that the voice heard in the panicked 911 call belonged to a man who would never return, leaving his words and the terrifying sounds of that night as the last evidence of what happened. The conflict between Israel and Palestine has lasted for decades, leaving generations to grow up surrounded by violence, fear, and loss. For those living through it, daily life is shaped by insecurity and the constant threat of attack. While political debates and media coverage focus on strategies, territorial disputes, and official statements, the experiences of ordinary people often disappear from view. Behind the headlines are real families, children, and communities struggling to survive in a situation that seems never-ending. This is the context in which Hind Rajab's story unfolds, a story that represents the human side of a conflict too often reduced to statistics and news cycles. Hind Rajab was a 6-year-old girl living in Tel Al-Hawa, a neighborhood in the southern part of Gaza City. By November 2023, just a month after the Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip, much of the area around her home had already been abandoned or destroyed. The streets she once played on were now damaged and dangerous, and life had become a constant struggle for survival. For Hind and her family, the war was not a distant news story. It was the reality of every day. By December 2023, the situation in Gaza had grown dire. The healthcare system was close to collapsing under the strain of continuous airstrikes and a strict blockade that prevented sufficient humanitarian aid from reaching the population. Organizations like Oxfam, the European Union, the United Kingdom, and the United Nations reported that aid was being deliberately blocked, creating a growing risk of famine. Food, medical supplies, and basic necessities were running out, leaving families with few options to meet even their most basic needs. For Hind's family, staying in their neighborhood was becoming increasingly impossible. Faced with worsening shortages and constant danger, Hind and 6 members of her family decided they could no longer stay in Tel Al-Hawa. Her uncle, Bashar Hamada, took responsibility for getting them to safety. He drove a black Kia Picanto, hoping to find a safer area within Gaza. Every turn of the wheel carried risk, as the city had become a patchwork of destroyed buildings, abandoned streets, and active conflict zones. For Hind, the journey was frightening but necessary. There was no choice but to leave home behind. On January 29th, 2024, as Bashar drove the family through one of Gaza's dangerous streets, an Israeli tank suddenly blocked the road ahead. Recognizing the danger, Bashar immediately raised a white flag, signaling surrender or a desire to negotiate. Despite this, the tank opened fire without warning. Bullets shattered the car's windshield and struck the body of the vehicle. Hind pressed herself down in the back seat, trying to stay out of sight as the gunfire continued. The peaceful symbol of the white flag offered no protection, and the family faced the sudden reality of being under attack. The attack was devastating. Hind's aunt, uncle, and 4 of her cousins were killed almost instantly. Her 15-year-old cousin, Lan Hamadeh, was the only one left alive and immediately called the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, a humanitarian organization providing emergency medical services and ambulances in Gaza.
الو مرحبا عمو.
انت مش حد تتوقع
الو مرحبا.
بني تتوقع علينا. انت بابا جنبك.
انتوا متخبيين؟
في السيارة احنا جنبينا الدبابة.
انتوا جوا السيارة؟ الو Hello.
On the phone, Lan's voice was filled with fear and panic as she described the shooting and the proximity of the tank. Hind, only 6 years old, remained in the car, terrified and alone, while the adult figures around her had been taken by the violence. For the next 3 hours, Hind stayed on the line with the Red Crescent dispatchers.
ميتين؟ وهم هلا معك بالسيارة؟ طب هلا وين انت هلا محمية؟
بالسيارة.
جوا السيارة انت صح؟ مش برا السيارة؟
صح. الدبابة جنبية.
الدبابة وين؟
جنبية.
ما عم تتحرك ولا واقف؟ نزل حدا منها؟
لا بتتحرك.
قريب كتير؟
كتير.
ما بدنا نخاف.
نحكي معك.
أنا معك يا عمري. أنا معك ليجي حدا ياخدك، ما بدي أسيبك لحالك.
لما يجي حدا بتفصل
ليش أفصل؟ حتى أنت إذا أجا لا سمح الله الجيش ما تفصلي، خلي الخط مفتوح، ما بدنا نفصل، أنا معاكي.
أنا تعجبيني
إيش يا عمري؟
خليكي معنا.
يا حبيبتي يا عمري والله معك، هيني أنا مش تاركك، بحكي معاكي، ما بدي أصلا أتركك.
أنا مش ساعة.
إيه؟ حبيبتي والله لو بإيدي لأذيكي. نحكي يا الله. يا رب احمينا.
She was instructed to remain hidden inside the car while rescue teams attempted to reach her. Outside, the area was under siege, and movement was extremely dangerous. The dispatchers coordinated with the Gaza Health Ministry and even attempted to communicate with the Israeli military to secure a safe path for an ambulance. Every moment was tense as Hind remained trapped, unsure if help would arrive or if the danger surrounding her would continue to grow. The rescue effort quickly ran into new dangers. The ambulance crew reported being targeted by what they believed were laser sights, possibly from Israeli forces. Gunfire and explosions made it impossible for them to reach Hind safely. The connection with the outside world went silent at times, leaving both Hind and the rescuers in uncertainty. The situation became increasingly desperate, with every passing minute raising the risk to Hind, her family, and the paramedics attempting the rescue. It wasn't until February 10th, 2024, 12 days later, that the full scale of the tragedy became clear. Hind, her uncle, aunt, cousins, and the paramedics who had tried to save them were all found dead. The car was riddled with bullet holes, its windows shattered, and the Red Crescent ambulance lay completely destroyed nearby. The investigation revealed that a US-made missile had struck the area, killing everyone inside the car and the paramedics who had risked their lives to help. The scene was a grim testament to the extreme violence that had unfolded during those 12 days of uncertainty. Investigations into the attack produced conflicting accounts. The Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor described the deaths as a planned execution by the Israeli army. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces initially claimed that no troops were near the vehicle at the time, suggesting that coordination with ambulances was unnecessary. Independent reporting from Al Jazeera and satellite analysis by the Washington Post, however, indicated that Israeli tanks were indeed close to the site when Hind and her family were killed. The wreckage of the ambulance was found along a route that had previously been approved for safe passage, raising further questions about how the attack occurred. Hind's disappearance and eventual death drew immediate international attention. Activists and humanitarian organizations worked to raise awareness and locate her, while her mother made public appeals, begging the global community not to forget her daughter.